Firstly, I am absolutely delighted, as some of you should be aware, we won not one but 2 awards. Really, Scotland's Finest Woods Awards. The really nice thing about this for me is that they cover very much a kind of broad breadth of what a community woodland should be doing. So it looks at the social impact, the economic impact, and indeed the environmental impact of everything that we're doing. Also, if you received your newsletter and read inside and got past the sort of great news on the front, there was more great news inside, which is that we were incredibly fortunate to receive a sizable legacy over the last 12 months. So we've received £50,000 from a Mr. Peter Powell, who we know a little bit about, but we don't really understand very much about his connections to woodland. So if you know anything, or you know anyone in the community who may know more about sort of why he chose to give a donation to us, we'd really love to learn more, a little bit more about him. So this is great to have that sort of backup, that backstop, so that if we need it, we can use it. If we come up with something that the community would like to do more in the woods, we now have the resources to do that. And on my point as well, I just wanted to thank Andy for really one of our new trustees, and also Will for joining us as well as a trustee. So thank you both very much for coming along. What we're planning to do is to install some posts, on the top of which will be a QR code, so that anybody walking around the woods, when they see one of these, they will be able to scan the QR code and start to go onto our website, and then immediately either become a friend and give on that regular basis, or indeed just give a one-off donation moving forward. As ever, with sort of changes to the woods, we didn't want to just go ahead and do this. We very much wanted to sort of get your sort of your sort of input into it. So these are the sites which we've kind of identified. So you'll notice just sort of centered around the more kind of trafficked area and the entrances to the woods. So we're not putting these suddenly in the middle of a sort of beautiful spot. We're sort of putting them on the path network.
We've through the last quarter we've had 3 very successful volunteering days doing logs. We have a few bags still to sell if anybody's desperate for logs at lunch. We've finished the winter tree safety assessment. We have to do it twice a year, both in the summer and the winter. We've done the winter assessment. We've given the list of trees and maps of trees to the Forestry Commission. So we're waiting for feedback. Because we're in the conservation area, obviously we need permission for certain bits of them before we can take action. A couple of path maintenance volunteering days coming up. And a small patch of rhododendron we want to get on top of. Those will be the next 3 volunteering days. Below the conservation volunteers will come later on in the spring to help us weed and go through all our recently planted trees, or the trees we planted over the last couple of years as part of that annual maintenance programme. Forest schools will get going again after half term, but the biggest item sort of on my agenda at the moment is our long-term forest plan. And really, sort of going forward from now, we've had loads of big interventions in the woodland, and we're at a point now where we really want to be a lot less hands-on and much lighter touch.
Yeah, thank you all for coming here, and thank you for commissioning me to do this survey, which was great thing to do. It's great to do a survey that's so close to home, because I only live just the other side of Garvold. So the most central piece or part really of that work is the map, the vegetation map, with all the wiggly lines separating out the different, what we call numbered polygons. There's about 80 something of them altogether. Tell you all stuff about the mix of different kind of national vegetation classification plant communities that are in there. I had 16 different national vegetation classification communities, and which are mostly woodland, obviously. Some of them are wet woodland, most of them it's slightly drier woodland, which you can group into broader types. There's some of them mainly lowland in Britain, some of them are mainly upland. At Gifford, we're kind of on the edge. We're sort of maybe just on the lowland side, climatically speaking. But in terms of climate, we are sort of on the edge. The Lammermuirs, the upland stuff of Lammermuirs comes right down to the lower edge of the hills, really. So it's not surprising that Gifford Community Wood has a mix of types of woodland that are found mainly in southeastern lowland Britain and others that are found mainly in the northwest. Plant species. I made a list of all the species of plants that I saw when I was going about doing the mapping. But anyway, it's got a reasonable list, over 200, just over 200 flowering plants, and 40 bryophytes, that's mosses and liverworts. And the more interesting, more notable ones I've put on this table here. And the colours are just to show that some of them are ancient woodland indicators. Ancient woodland being places that have been on the map, on like Ordnance Survey maps, and even before then, on all the maps since about 1750 or so. So historical records show that there's been woodland there for a very long time. And some mosses and liverworts that are indicators of relatively clean air. I'm going through them in National Vegetation Classification order. All the woods begin with W, and the lower numbers are the wetter woodlands and the higher numbers are the drier ones. Here in the east side of the site, and it's got loads of nettles. That's one of the main things. W7, there's a bit more of that in this site. That's not so nutrient enriched. It's wet woodland, it's on wettish ground. Soils seem to be more or less neutral as far as the species are telling us. And you get things like alder. There's alders growing there. That's another kind of W7 that's very rushy. W7 occurs in small patches scattered about this wood. And this one is W7C. This is quite distinctive. It's got tussocks of this grass called tufted hairgrass, moving on up the numbers into the drier woodlands. W8 and W9 are kinds of woodland that show that the soils are not so acid really. They're kind of neutral to even maybe slightly calcareous or alkaline. And the ground layer has lots of different herbs, which can be quite colourful in the spring and summer, as seen here, some forget-me-nots and the pink flowers of the red campion, Silene dioica. W10, this is about the most common kind of woodland here at this site, and it's a community of kind of mildly acid soils. And we find commonest trees usually in W10 are oak and birch, but also things like holly, sycamore are pretty common in it. In some places, planted conifers can do very well on those kind of soils. Things like honeysuckle that we can see in there in the foreground, which can form a sort of tangle on the ground and then can also grow up the trees. It adds an element of structure to the whole vegetation, as does bramble and raspberry, which you find in the same kind of woodland community. Shuttlecock ferns, there's another picture, I think with some more of those. These things, that's broad buckler fern. They do really well on these slightly acid soils, even the strongly acid soils they do well as well, but because those kind of tufted ferns and the honeysuckle and bramble and raspberry are all very palatable to large herbivores like sheep, cattle and deer. And there's no livestock in this wood. There are deer, roe deer, but not at such a high density as to have a sort of major impact on these plant species. Some bits are quite species poor, especially where you get the beech. A lot of litter layer of beech leaf litter on the ground. It's a very common, typical thing with a lot of beech, and it's mixed in the canopy through quite a lot of this woodland. And a conifer canopy version of it as well in the north of the site. There are those this mix of different things. There's Scots pine and Norway spruce and Douglas fir in there. In some places it's similar, but it's more mossy, with big mosses like this one here called Hylocomiadelphus triquetras. It's a lovely moss. Then there are places here where there's more diversity in vegetation types because the soil's much more acid. So I'm going in order here of the less acid, then the mildly acid, and now strongly acid. And you can tell that the soil's more acid here because the ground layer's got all this blaeberry growing in it. Then there's some scrub, W21, hawthorn scrub. Wee bit of that at the eastern edge, not far from that field where there's the orchard. So it's a place where there's been some rhododendron clearance, which is great to have that rhododendron clearance going on. Obviously, for a while it can leave some very, very bare ground, but that's better than having it all covered in rhododendron. And then grasslands, little open areas within the wood. Some of them are grasslands, others different kind of vegetation. This is that orchard area, and this is a great one. This is near there as well. there's just a small area at the edge of this open bit of ground, which is it's a neutral grassland growing in it, and it's quite a rare community locally. It's very rare in East Lothian. That the species is scattered about a bit more in other kinds of vegetation, but MG3 is quite a rarity around here. So that's a nice thing to find, a really good population of wood cranesbill there. So, and then there's other herb-dominated vegetation types, like this one. It's mainly nettles, and there was another one of related thing, Agapodium, that's ground elder. It's another thing that people often don't like because it gets in their gardens and they can't eradicate it very easily. But they're not as bad as rhododendron. I always think rhododendron is the real bad one. Nice to have that pond, another bit of habitat diversity with some of the W7 wet neutral woodland around it. These are some of the ancient woodland indicators. Woodruff, that's a lovely little plant. It's a kind of bedstraw with white flowers and quite broad leaves. There's little bits of it in just a very few places in this wood. Bluebell, the native bluebell is on the ancient woodland indicator list, so it's nice to see a lot of that. And Goldilocks buttercup, I found one patch of this in the southern part of the wood, central southern part. I was excited to find that. It's not very common. Dog's Mercury, that's a classic ancient woodland indicator plant of woodland or quite rich soils. There's plenty of that in that middle part of the wood. Non-native species, there's loads of them in this wood. Big list, which is not surprising because it's in a lowland area next to an urban area. And but a lot of these things aren't really a problem. Some people sort of equate non-native species with invasive. Some are invasive, but an awful lot of them aren't. But some of them are, and that I think is the worst of all, the rhododendron. And it's great to see that you're getting on top of things here, dealing with it. Beech casts a lot of shade. The leaf litter can smother the ground, and you don't get so much vegetation underneath it. So there's a problem aspect to beech. Finally, one thing I do like about this wood is that it's adjacent to big leafy gardens, which means it's not just a wood like an island and everything outside is sort of entirely different. It kind of grades out with trees and shrubs in the gardens. So there's a sort of buffer zone which has its own interest. All these gardens here. I often, when we go for a walk here, I often walk back through these housing schemes here and admire the tree and shrub mixes of things and the structure there. It's all a nice kind of habitat. I think that's almost it. The honeysuckle and the deadwood. It's great to see so much deadwood knocking about. Good for fungi. Moss is growing up the stems of the young trees, of the young ash in the middle of the wood. They're very sculptural, which is wonderful things. They're wonderful to see. So they're like sculptures. In fact, they reminded me of sculptural things like skyscrapers, which is I really like skyscrapers. And being low down amongst those mosses, you see these towers of mosses. Romeo Towers. That's in New York. Hope that's been of some interest, and thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience.